Las Vegas, October 1960. The Sands Hotel and Casino stood as the crown jewel of the Strip, a shimmering palace of glass and neon rising from the desert floor. This wasn't just another casino. This was where presidents stayed, where movie stars gambled until dawn, where the world's wealthiest men came to forget their troubles. The Sands represented power, glamour, and the American dream itself. Frank Sinatra understood this better than anyone. His 9% stake in the casino wasn't just a business investment, it was validation. The kid from Hoboken, the skinny Italian boy who'd been called a dago his entire childhood, now owned a piece of the most prestigious casino in America. He performed in the Copper Room to sold-out crowds every weekend, commanding $50,000 a week. High rollers flew in from around the world just to watch him sing. But on this particular Wednesday afternoon in October, as the desert sun beat down and temperatures climbed past 90 degrees, something was about to shatter Frank's carefully constructed empire. He was in his penthouse suite on the 15th floor, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire Strip. Frank stood at those windows in his shirt sleeves, a glass of Jack Daniels in hand, reviewing contracts for the upcoming Rat Pack shows. Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Joey Bishop, Peter Lawford. Together they were unstoppable. Together they packed the Copper Room with crowds that made casino owners weep with joy. The door burst open without warning. No knock, no announcement, just the sudden intrusion of Hank Sanicola, Frank's longtime assistant and business partner. Hank was usually unflappable, the kind of guy who could handle anything with a calm smile. But right now, his face was pale, his tie loosened, sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning. "Frank, we've got a problem downstairs. A serious problem." Sinatra turned from the window, his blue eyes sharpening with that look, the one that could freeze a room. He set down his glass with deliberate care. "What kind of problem?" Hank closed the door, checked to make sure they were alone. "It's Sammy and his band." Frank felt something cold settle in his stomach. Sammy Davis Jr. had arrived an hour ago with his orchestra. 15 of the finest musicians in America, men who'd played with Count Basie, Duke Ellington, Dizzy Gillespie. They were scheduled to open for the Rat Pack's weekend residency. Shows already sold out, shows that would generate close to $250,000 in revenue. Sammy wasn't just Frank's opening act. He was family. What about them? Frank's voice dropped to that dangerous quiet tone, the one anyone who knew him recognized as a warning sign. Hank took a breath. "Carl Cohen won't let them through the front entrance. He's making them use the service door, the one by the loading dock. And he's told the kitchen staff they can't eat in the main dining room. He wants them eating in the staff cafeteria, down in the basement." The silence that followed was suffocating. Outside, Las Vegas hummed with its usual chaos. Slot machines ringing, dealers calling cards, tourists laughing. But in this room, time seemed to stop. Carl Cohen. The name alone carried weight in Vegas. He was the Sands casino manager, a tough Brooklyn operator with direct connections to Meyer Lansky and the East Coast families who secretly owned pieces of every major casino on the Strip. Cohen ran the floor with an iron fist, managing millions in cash flow, keeping high rollers happy, making sure the odds always favored the house. Even with Frank's ownership stake, Cohen held real power, the kind that came from knowing where all the bodies were buried. Frank stood there, motionless, his jaw working. Then he walked to the bar and poured himself another drink, not because he wanted it, but because he needed a moment to think, to control the rage building in his chest like a Nevada thunderstorm. "Where is Sammy now?" "In the service corridor with his band." "Frank, they've been standing there for 20 minutes. People are walking past them, staring. Kitchen staff, housekeeping. Sammy's trying to keep his dignity, but—" Hank's voice cracked. "Frank, it's humiliating." Sinatra knocked back the drink in one swallow. "Where's Cohen?" "The pit." "But Frank, you need to understand something. Cohen's not budging on this. I tried talking to him already. He says it's house policy, not personal. Says if we let Sammy and his boys through the front door, if we let them eat in the main dining room, we'll lose the Southern money." Frank turned, expression cold as ice. The Southern money. The Texas oil men, the Atlanta businessmen, the Louisiana plantation owners. Hank ticked them off on his fingers. They spend $50, $60, $70,000 in a single weekend, Frank. Some have already complained about Sammy performing here at all. A few threaten to take their play to the dunes if we don't maintain certain standards. Standards? The word hung in the air like poison. Frank walked to his jacket, draped over a chair, and pulled it on with methodical precision, buttoned it, adjusted his cufflinks, straightened his tie. Every movement was controlled, deliberate. This was how Frank Sinatra prepared for battle, not with weapons, but with tailoring. "Get Sammy," he said quietly. "Bring him up here. Tell him to wait in my suite and not to leave until I call for him. Frank, listen to me, and tell Cohen I want to see him in the boardroom. 10 minutes. Frank, this isn't going to end well. The other owners, 10 minutes, Hank, not 11, 10. Hank stared at him for a long moment, recognizing something in Frank's expression, something from the old days, from the Hoboken streets, from before the fame and fortune, something dangerous and uncompromising. Finally, Hank nodded and left. Frank stood alone in his suite, looking out at the Vegas Strip below. His kingdom, his empire. He thought about that 9% stake, what it meant, what it had cost him to get it. He thought about the $600,000 he'd earned last year from his share of the profits. He thought about respect, power, legitimacy. Then he thought about Sammy Davis Jr., standing in a service corridor like he was nobody, like his talent meant nothing, like the color of his skin erased everything he'd achieved. Frank Sinatra had grown up poor. Really poor. 4 people to a room, poor. Hand-me-down shoes with holes in them, poor. His mother Dolly had worked herself to exhaustion just to keep food on the table. Frank knew what it meant to be looked down on, to be treated as less than human because of your name, your neighborhood, your heritage. But he'd never known what it meant to be black in America. He'd never been forced to use a separate entrance, a separate bathroom, a separate water fountain. He'd never been told he couldn't eat where white people ate, couldn't swim where white people swam. Sammy Davis Jr. lived with that every single day of his life, and Frank Sinatra was about to risk everything to change it. He took the elevator down to the 3rd floor, where the executive offices were located. The boardroom was at the end of a long hallway, oak-paneled and smoke-filled, with a long conference table and leather chairs that had witnessed countless negotiations, threats, and deals. Frank arrived first. He sat at the head of the table, lit a cigarette, and waited. Carl Cohen entered exactly 9 minutes later, flanked by Jack Entratter, the entertainment director, and Sidney Korshak, a lawyer with connections to every major family in organized crime. Cohen was stocky and broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that had seen everything and been impressed by nothing. He sat down without being invited. Frank, his voice was flat, businesslike. Carl, I hear you've got a problem with house policy. Sinatra leaned forward, his elbows on the table, hands clasped. When he spoke, his voice was steady and cold. I don't have a problem, Carl. You do. Because in exactly 8 minutes, you're going to walk down to that service entrance, find Sammy Davis Jr. and every member of his orchestra, and you're going to personally escort them through the front door of this hotel. You're going to seat them in the main dining room at the best table available, and you're going to make sure every member of that band is treated exactly like the headlining artists they are. Cohen didn't blink. He pulled out a cigarette, lit it with a gold lighter, took his time exhaling. Can't do that, Frank? Can't or won't? Both. We've got rules here. They've worked since day one. Rules. Frank's laugh was bitter. What rules? The rules that say the man who's about to make this casino $250,000 this weekend can't walk through the same door as some oil baron from Houston. Jack Entratter leaned forward. Frank, be reasonable. This isn't about Sammy personally. Everyone knows he's talented. But this is business. Pure business. Explain business to me, Jack. Entratter glanced at Cohen, who nodded. High rollers from the South, Texas, Georgia, Louisiana, Alabama, they represent approximately 40% of our casino revenue. Last year alone, they dropped close to $3 million at our tables. Your personal cut from that was around $250,000. These men don't want to eat breakfast next to a colored performer. They don't want their wives sharing a swimming pool with colored musicians. They come here to escape that. Escape what? Treating human beings like human beings? Sidney Korshak spoke for the first time, his voice smooth and measured. Frank, let me put this in terms you'll understand. The other owners, the silent partners, the men in Chicago and New York who make this place possible, they're not going to appreciate you disrupting a profitable business model over a social issue. These are men who don't like change, men who don't respond well to ultimatums. The threat was subtle but clear. The men in Chicago and New York weren't businessmen in the traditional sense. They were organized crime figures with power to make problems and people disappear. Frank stubbed out his cigarette. Is that a threat, Sidney? It's a reality check. Cohen leaned back. Look, Frank, nobody's questioning your friendship with Sammy. We all know you're loyal. That's admirable. But this is bigger than friendship. Last year, the Sands cleared $7 million in profit. Your 9% earned you $630,000. You want to risk that? For what? So Sammy can feel important? Frank stood abruptly, his chair scraping back. He walked to the window, looked out at the strip, at the neon signs beginning to glow. When he turned back, his voice was different, quieter, more dangerous. That man down in your service corridor, Sammy Davis Jr., he's performing on the same stage as me. He's singing to the same audience. He's getting the same standing ovations, sometimes bigger applause than I do, and you know what? Good. Because he's that talented, but he can't walk through the front door? He can't eat where we eat? You think that makes any kind of sense? It makes business sense, Cohen said flatly. And in Vegas, that's the only sense that matters. Frank walked back to the table, placed both hands on it, leaned forward. Here's what makes sense to me, Carl. You have exactly two choices. Just two. Choice one, you integrate this hotel. Not next month, not next year, today, right now. Front door, dining room, pool, everything. Sammy and his band get treated exactly the same as Dean, Joey, Peter and me. And next week when Count Basie's orchestra comes through, same treatment. Every single black performer who plays this stage from this day forward. Cohen started to interrupt, but Frank raised his hand sharply. I'm not finished. Choice two, I walk. Right now, this minute, I pull the Rat Pack shows. All of them. This weekend, next month, the whole residency. I take Dean and Sammy to the Riviera, or we'll fly to Miami and play the Fontainebleau. And on my way out, I'm calling every reporter in this city. I'll hold a press conference right in your lobby. I'll tell them exactly why Frank Sinatra won't perform at the Sands anymore. I'll tell them about service entrances and staff cafeterias. Within 24 hours, the whole country will know what kind of place the Sands really is. The room was deadly silent. Korshak and Entrata exchanged glances. Cohen's jaw was tight, his eyes calculating. You're bluffing, Cohen finally said. You've got too much invested here. Frank smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Try me. My cut last year was over 600,000. Fine. I'll walk away from every penny. Because you know what I learned growing up in Hoboken, Carl? There are things more important than money. There's dignity, there's principle, there's being able to look at yourself in the mirror and not see a coward staring back. The other owners won't stand for this, Korshak said quietly. Then let them come talk to me. Let them fly out here and sit in this room and tell me to my face why Sammy Davis Jr. shouldn't be allowed to walk through the front door of a hotel where he's the star attraction. Cohen stood slowly, face flushed. Do you have any idea what you're doing? Southern high rollers will leave, not just from the Sands, from Vegas entirely, if other hotels follow your lead. We're talking millions in lost revenue. Your personal stake will be worth half what it is now, maybe less. $3 million minimum over the next 5 years. Frank walked to the door, then turned back. Carl, let me tell you something about money. I grew up with nothing, absolutely nothing. I slept 4 to a room. I wore shoes with cardboard in the soles because we couldn't afford new ones. You think I'm afraid of losing money? The only thing I'm afraid of is becoming the kind of man who could watch his friend be treated like he's less than human and do nothing about it. He checked his watch. You've got 7 minutes to make your decision. After that, I make my phone calls. 20 minutes later, Frank Sinatra walked through the lobby of the Sands Hotel with Sammy Davis Jr. beside him, his arm around Sammy's shoulders. Behind them came Sammy's entire 15-piece orchestra, carrying their instruments, walking through that front entrance for the first time. Dean Martin and Peter Lawford had materialized, flanking them like bodyguards, laughing as if this was the most natural thing in the world. The casino floor fell silent. Pit bosses stopped mid-count. Dealers paused with cards in their hands. Tourists froze. Everyone watched as Frank Sinatra made his statement without saying a word. Carl Cohen watched from the pit, expression unreadable. Within the hour, every department head received a memo. All facilities now integrated, no exceptions. The repercussions were immediate and brutal. Within 2 weeks, the Sands began losing its southern high rollers. The Texas oil men took their business to the Desert Inn. The Atlanta businessmen moved to the Tropicana. Letters arrived daily from wealthy patrons expressing their anger, their promise never to return. By the end of the first quarter of 1961, the Sands had lost 42% of its high roller business. Quarterly profits fell from $1.8 million to $1.1 million. Frank's personal quarterly earnings dropped from $150,000 to $87,000. Other owners were furious. Some demanded he sell his stake. He refused. When reporters asked about declining revenues, he shrugged. Money comes and goes, principles don't. But something remarkable happened. In January 1961, the Riviera quietly integrated. They didn't make announcements. They simply stopped enforcing segregation. When asked why, the owner said, if the Sands can survive it, so can we. In March, the Flamingo followed, then the Tropicana. By the end of 1961, every major casino on the Strip had integrated, not because of federal law. The Civil Rights Act wouldn't pass for 3 more years. They integrated because Frank Sinatra proved it was possible. The Southern money never fully returned, but Vegas began attracting new customers. Progressive businessmen from California, black entertainers who could finally stay where they performed. The city's reputation shifted from the last bastion of segregation to the city of the future. Frank's financial sacrifice was staggering. Over 5 years, his decision cost him approximately $3.2 million, equivalent to $30 million today. He never complained. When his business manager showed him projections, Frank said simply, worth every penny. But the real impact came later. In 1963, when the Civil Rights Act was debated, NLCP attorney Thurgood Marshall testified before the Senate, bringing documentation of the Vegas integration. If Frank Sinatra can integrate the Sands Hotel and survive, Marshall told senators, then every restaurant, every hotel, every business in America can do the same. The economic arguments for segregation are hollow. Senator Strom Thurmond challenged him. Mr. Marshall, the Sands lost millions. How can you call that a success? Marshall's response became famous. Senator, the Sands lost money, Frank Sinatra lost money, but Sammy Davis Jr. gained his dignity, and in my calculation, that's a profitable trade. The Civil Rights Act passed the following year. Sammy never forgot. In his 1989 autobiography, written before his death, he devoted a chapter to that October day. People ask me about Frank Sinatra all the time. Let me tell you something about Frank. That man didn't just risk his money for me. He risked his relationships, his reputation, his standing with very dangerous people. He did it without hesitation, without asking for thanks, without making a big public statement. He simply refused to accept a world where I couldn't walk through the same door he did. That's not friendship, that's brotherhood. The service entrance where Sammy was forced to wait still exists today, preserved at the Nevada State Museum. Thousands visit annually, standing in that corridor, imagining what it felt like to be turned away simply because of skin color. And they learn about the man who said no, who risked everything, who understood that dignity, equality, and basic human respect are worth more than any amount of money. Frank Sinatra never wanted to be remembered as a civil rights hero. He wanted to be remembered as a singer, an entertainer. But history doesn't always let us choose our legacy. Sometimes our most important moments are the ones we never planned, the ones where we simply do what's right because we can't live with ourselves if we don't. On that October afternoon in 1960, standing in that boardroom, staring down Carl Cohen and decades of business as usual, Frank Sinatra made a choice. He chose principle over profit, dignity over dollars, humanity over revenue. He chose to pay the price because some things are worth everything.